All right, so before we start, I'm going to ask you to remember June of 2020. So this is when Black Lives Matter was a trend on Instagram. Remember those black screens that people would post? They would change their profile pictures to a black square just to make sure that you knew that they were on the right side of history. I'm guilty of it too. But the thing is that a couple weeks later, it was National Girlfriend Day, and all of a sudden, everyone's posting about, oh my God, my girlfriend, oh my God, I hate not having a girlfriend, oh my God, I hate everyone in relationships, da 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 da. And it's like, first of all, where's National Arissa Day? And second of all, how can you just do a complete 180 from one of the most important social justice movements in our generation to talking about some girl you met in calculus? It doesn't make sense to me. And the reason is that we think that by showing and performing, that we can show other people that we are good, that we empathize with others. But in reality, it's all a symbolic change. And just like that black square doesn't hold any true value, our promises are the same. And so today, I want to talk about how mainstream empathy has honestly put us back a step. The progress that we want to see isn't going to happen if we continue to cherish empathy the way that we do right now. So we're first going to talk about what empathy at its root actually means. Then we're going to talk about the social determinants of health and how the healthcare industry has used empathy in order to improve healthcare outcomes. And finally, we're going to talk about how we can implement that into our own lives. So I want to go back to the beginning of our education, kindergarten. This is when I discovered that nap time was my favorite. So Mr. Barsky, if you're listening, maybe instead of class meeting, we could do nap time. But in any case, kindergarten is where we learned the first stages of emotional maturity. We're taught the golden rule: treat others the way that you want to be treated. And we're taught the basic definition of empathy: put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But this is the real definition: the ability to imagine and share somebody else's feelings and perspectives. And it seems pretty straightforward, right? Just put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But it's actually a lot more difficult than that. On a biological level, we use the different parts of our brain in order to comprehend empathy. I'm taking psych right now, so I just learned this. That's a bit of a traumatic event. But basically, there's 3 parts of your brain that are involved in empathy. The first is your prefrontal cortex, and that has to do with your personality. The second is your temporal lobe, and that has to do with you processing the information you're being given. And finally, it's your hippocampus that's dedicated to your memory. So when someone's telling you about the bad day that they're having or how tired they are from staying up until 4 a.m., you realize that your brain is trying to piece together a way that you can make them feel better. But the problem is we're actually really bad at comforting people. In the hallways here, you hear people saying, oh, I had this and I had that, and then they're like, oh, I had this, no, I had that, that's way worse, my life is way worse. And it doesn't make sense. And again, it's all symbolic. The words that we say don't have any meaning. But what's unfortunate is that when we actually look at therapy and clinical settings, Robert Elliott of the American Psychologists Association in 2011 found that even in therapy, empathy doesn't work unless it's grounded in authentic caring. Authentic, not symbolic. Your therapist just validating, oh, I understand how you feel, doesn't mean anything to the patient. And it's the same way in our world, in our day-to-day lives. But when we look at companies, we see that makeup brands like YSL and Tarte and Beauty Blender champion diversity and inclusion. When in reality, when they face backlash for not having enough skin tones in their foundation line, they come out with this statement saying, we're so sorry, we're going to do better. Maybe they hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion director. Or maybe they have Multicultural Day. Or maybe they have a seminar every month trying to talk about the different oppressed people in America because they're politically aware. But that doesn't help unless every day is Multicultural Day, unless you actually implement the lessons that you're learning in these seminars into your day-to-day lives. And that's why I find mainstream empathy to be so harmful, because people think they're making progress forward, and they're not. Instead, we're staying stagnant in our lives. So, case in point, let's begin to talk about the social determinants of health. So, the social determinants of health is something that the healthcare industry has used in order to implement empathy, in order to better patient outcomes, to make longer patient lives, and to just help create a better treatment plan. So I want you to imagine you're walking into the doctor's office. You're filling out your paperwork, you go in, the nurse takes your weight, your blood pressure, and then the scariest part of it all is when they take your height. And I would wear like padded socks and stand up super tall, that bun I used to wear, keep it on the top of my head. I'd really try to make sure that the doctor would get that extra inch out of me. I'm 5'3", I promise. Or maybe, in our age, if you're like a heteronormative guy, you say that you're 6 foot, but in reality you're actually 5'11", because if you were 6 foot, then you would say you're 6'1". In any case, you go into the doctor's office room and you meet them for all of 5 minutes. And they tell you that you're predisposed to diabetes. And then they're like, okay, here's a brochure, eat healthy, work out, that's it. But what if you don't have access to nutritional food? What if going to Whole Foods is too expensive for your budget and instead you have to go to a grocery outlet? What if you're on food stamps? What if you work at a fast food restaurant and the way that you get your dinner is by eating the leftovers, because any penny that you earn goes to your rent and paying off your student debt? We're not in control of a lot of our life, even though we like to think we are. Maybe here at Harker, we are in control of more than the average person, but we live in a bubble. And unfortunately, if the healthcare industry doesn't acknowledge that, then the mortality rates increase. And so when we look at education and healthcare, we see that they are directly correlated. So the social determinants of health, basically, are just any part of our life that affects our health. One of those things is education. And so we can see up here that we look at the educational attainment for both sexes, and we see that life expectancy at age 25 is higher for those that have a higher degree of education. Then we look at infant mortality rate, so when people who are educated have kids. And we see that with more educational attainment, you have a longer lifespan of your child. And it all boils down to the fact that something as arbitrary as education affects your health. Things like access to transportation, access to digital literacy, all of that affects how your health is. And if doctors don't address that, then we see a real problem. Over here, we see family income and how that affects children having a good, very good, or mediocre health. And I think the graph speaks for itself. And finally, I wanted to just show you how educational attainment can affect health in a variety of ways. I mean, all of this stuff, I couldn't even read it. And so it makes us ask the question of what the healthcare industry could do. What is a way that they could solve it? And so what they did was the Canadian Medical Association did a comprehensive study across Canada looking at different hospitals that implemented empathy, the social determinants of healthcare. And they found that women who came into the ER with broken bones and bruises, that only 14% of them were asked if domestic violence could have been a cause of their injuries. Even though in Canada, over 170,000 women report to the police of domestic violence in their homes, and there have been over 1.6 million self-reported cases. And they found that when they implemented compassion and empathy, that patients were more forthcoming, meaning that their abusers were caught, their injuries could be more properly addressed, that they never had to go back to that situation. Without the social determinants of health, healthcare workers weren't able to properly address these women. But using empathy and actually implementing it has revolutionized the way that our healthcare industry has worked. But finally, I understand that we're not all part of the healthcare industry. There's other parts of us that we're interested in our day-to-day lives. We need empathy, but how do we implement that? What does genuine empathy look like? And for me, I've struggled with some health issues over the past year, and I felt like I was in and out of doctors' offices and I was spending more time there than I was at home. But on my last day at this doctor's office, there was a nurse named Faith. It was such a pretty name for a nurse. And Faith gave me a hug as I was exiting the office. She told me that she would miss me and that she wished I would have a wonderful rest of my life. And it's funny because this stranger, who I barely knew, impacted me. I think about her every day. Maybe I'm touch deprived. Maybe I need a new love interest. But in all seriousness, she changed me. She changed my perspective on life. And in a really dark tunnel, she was showing me that there's a light. And so that's why I think it's so important to just think about the way that we talk to each other, the way that we love one another. Because we don't want it to just be symbolic. We want it to actually matter. We want to reap the benefits of empathy the same way the healthcare industry has. And so when we look at the communities that we inhabit, we look at a case study of Zoom. Eric Yon, the CEO, a proud member of the Harker community, said that he hated going to work every single day at his old job. He would get up and dread the environment in that office. And he vowed that when he started his own company, that environment would be one of happiness and compassion. And he did exactly that. Zoom, for 2 years in a row, was voted the most happy company with the most happy employees because they delivered happiness. That's their mantra, delivering happiness. And what's interesting is that he said that his workers are more productive, that they benefit not just on an interpersonal level, but on a profit level. And he's right, because the Oxford Business School in 2019 did a meta-analysis of a bunch of different companies around Great Britain. And they found that workers that were more happy and engaged in their companies were 14% more productive. 14%. I know a lot of you in here are DECA kids. Okay, that's a big number. That's a lot of profit. And I think it's important to understand that because empathy isn't just about feeling good. It has tangible impacts and tangible benefits. And that's why it's so important. And when we look at makeup brands like Huda Beauty, it's not mine, and Fenty Beauty by Rihanna, we've seen that Fenty Beauty within its first 15 months made over $530 million in revenue, an unheard of figure for even a celebrity brand. And so it makes us think, if feeling good isn't enough incentive, or if you don't care about other people, then maybe profit's enough. And when we think about our impact and our footprint on the world, we think of companies like Patagonia, where $50 million in the past year has been donated to the Holdfast Collective, an institution dedicated to helping the world and the climate. And Patagonia knows that by them making clothes, they're contributing to the climate crisis. But they also know that profit is what's driving them. They know that their company houses a bunch of different employees, a bunch of different workers, people who depend on them. So they don't just shut down the company because that's unrealistic. Instead, they find a way to better the world. Banks like Goldman Sachs donate 10% of their revenue to helping female entrepreneurs. And obviously, a lot of us, all of us, can't do that, right? But we can aspire to be that. We can try to embody those companies and see that when they genuinely care, we genuinely benefit. And so as I was writing this speech, I was talking to my brother and my dad, who are, big businessmen. And they were like, why are you talking about this? Like, you haven't been in the business world. You don't plan on going into the business world. You're not going to major in it. You don't do DECA. I really love DECA, And to that, I didn't really have a response, but I thought about it. And it was like, I'm naive, sure, but I also have hope. I have hope of what the future can hold for me, for my children, for my friends. I have a world in my head that isn't there in the status quo. But I really think that with empathy, there's something that we can actually do. And this inner dialogue that I've had with myself for the past 2 years since posting that black square has made me realize that I want to be the change I see in the world. I know it's cliche, but seriously, that's what we all want at the end of the day, right? We want to make a change. We want to leave this world a better place than what we found. And so just keep empathy in your mind when you hold a door open for somebody, when you're talking to somebody about how sleep deprived they are. Keep that in mind. That's all we can really do. Thank you.